Hey, design enthusiasts! Welcome to Next in Line Design, a podcast by the World Design Organization's Young Designers Circle. We're all about embracing a new mindset in design, one that's bold, innovative, and impactful. We're here to connect with the next wave of design talent and explore how you can use your creativity to make a real impact. Get ready for fresh ideas and inspiration from young designers around the world who are reshaping the industry. We're here to spark conversations, inspire change, and explore new ideas in design. But remember, these are just our perspectives on one big, evolving field. Please note that the opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the official views of the World Design Organization or its affiliates. Let's dive in and see what's next in line. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Next in Line Design podcast. I am Abigail Hoover, a facilitator for the World Organization's Young Designers Circle, and I will also be the host for today's podcast. In today's episode, we have two brilliant guests who are joining us, Khushi and Adam Heath. Khushi is an engineer turned artist and designer from India with an all-consuming passion for challenging the status quo through a fusion of art, design, and outer space. Currently a strategic design student at Parsons School of Design. Adam is an industrial designer working at Metacomos, a startup developing next-generation spacesuits in Sydney, Australia. As well as being a member of the Young Designer Circle, he at Metacomos really care about making human spaceflight accessible to all, enhancing humans in extreme conditions, and overall emphasizing human-centered design in space. I suppose I should also introduce myself. I am Abigail, originally from Canada and now based in London, UK. I am an industrial designer and design engineer by trade, but worked on several space missions consisting of systems engineering, satellite operations, and project management. I now work on focusing in cultural and consumer adoption of space technologies into terrestrial applications and the introduction of design and business strategy within space missions to forward scalable, sustainable missions. With those introductions made, I think it's time to hear from our guests. Could you guys take a little bit of an opportunity to tell us a bit more about who you are, what you're doing, what current projects are on the go? Khushi, maybe you could set us off.
Hello. So thank you so much for having me on the podcast, by the way. And starting with, so I currently study strategic design at Parsons School of Design in New York. It's a really exciting time in the program because what I'm learning right now is more about design strategies and like strategizing about like products, strategizing about concepts and how it sort of affects overall systems. So I really like that it's going broader because before coming to Parsons, I worked as a field engineer. I was also a creative director for a nonprofit, did a bunch of stuff there. I also did photography. So I kind of had a very do everything approach. And here I get to sort of learn how to strategize all of this and bring it together. One of the projects that I've been working on is called Fallen Artifacts. So Fallen Artifacts basically explores how do people react when they encounter a fragment of a spacecraft that has fallen back on Earth, and how does that differ from when we encounter asteroids? So kind of exploring the emotional, cultural, and sensory experience of being the first to touch like a part of spacefaring history. Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, that kind of intersection between engineering, design, STEM, culture, behavior. So cool. I'm sure we'll hear more about it. Adam, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself as well?
Yeah, thank you. Hey guys, really good to be back on the podcast again. As Abigail mentioned, my name's Adam Heath. I'm currently an industrial designer at a startup called Metacomos in Sydney, Australia, and we're developing next generation spacesuits to make human spaceflight more accessible. Me personally, I would consider myself a little bit of a newbie to the space industry. I think before this opportunity, I hadn't had much an insight into the space industry. I'd seen it from an outside perspective, and so it's been really cool to learn more about the overall space industry, where it's going, and more importantly, how design can look to influence the work that's going on. I think here at Metacosmos, obviously with designing spacesuits, we really have a big focus on humans, and more so enhancing humans. I think when we look at going to space and sort of the activities evolved around that in terms of training, and the skills needed, it's really putting humans at the extreme. And there's a lot of learnings there that we can apply back to the activities done here on Earth in those extreme conditions as well. So that's what we're aiming to do at Metacosmos, is by giving people the accessibility to learn more about human spaceflight. Hopefully in the future, obviously there'll be more opportunities to go to space for people, have careers in space. And hopefully here at Metacosmos, we're going to make that more possible and bring more people into the loop. So I think it's a really cool conversation we're having today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're being so humble by saying that you're a newbie to space, because if anybody's ever worked with you, they can attest to how much of a design powerhouse you are. So I don't know what space missions you'll be working on in the future, but the ones that you choose to work on, they'll have an incredible person on their team. And you mentioned it greatly, actually, or in a great way, on kind of this overarching discussion that we want to have in the podcast, really focusing on this idea of design in space, specifically human-centered design. Now, I think we can all agree that that's quite incredibly broad, and it's definitely a developing field. But I wanted to ask you both, what are your opinions on human-centered design in space? What does that mean to say that you're a human-centered designer working in the aerospace industry? Adam,
Khushi, if you want to take this.
Oh.
Yeah, I'll go first. I think it like Abigail, I think you mentioned, it is a newer field within the space industry. I think of the time gone past, the design necessarily wasn't seen as a massive focus. Obviously, engineering was more of the heavy lifter, with developing a lot of the new technologies, and ultimately, the speed in which they got to space back in the 60s, was the real key. But I think now that we're looking at more habitats and more getting more humans into space, that design influence is now creeping in a lot more, and it's now being seen as more importance. My job as a designer in a space company, I see as always keeping the human in the conversation, always keeping the user. Obviously at a spacesuit company, that's a little bit easier because we're designing around a human, but I think even speaking to designers that work at satellite companies, they're now looking at ways in which not only just to keep the human in the conversation, but how things are affecting humans back here on Earth as well. I think a lot of people may not realize that a lot of the tech that is made here on Earth today, wouldn't be made if it hadn't have been made for space first. I always give the example of your cameras in your smartphones. That was first developed for going to space. It's only due to that we now are able to have amazing cameras in our pockets. So I think, hopefully a designer's role in space is going to become ever more present and is going to be always a part of the conversation.
Absolutely. Khushi, what are your thoughts on that? A designer's responsibility, role, job? How do you frame it?
I think Adam stated it very in a right manner. Like, while much of space design has kind of historically prioritized engineering constraints, mission success, we are at a turning point where we are really thinking about designing for people. So be it about designing for astronauts, future space travelers, and even those on Earth impacted by space exploration, everybody is kind of like taking a center stage into this conversation now. So while HCD technically could be about ergonomics or like usability in microgravity, for example, I think for me, it would be rethinking about who space is really for and how do we design for those diverse lived experiences. And I think one other thing that I also think about is like having to expand beyond our current frameworks, because I feel like a lot of HCD here on Earth thinks about like functionality and efficiency. So I do like and appreciate that, but having the added angle of culture, emotion, and ethical dimensions would be really crucial going forward.
Yeah, I think you touched on a really cool point there, which I think is that, space is really for everyone, and the fact that, we have a designer's job is in every field is always to design for the future. And I think obviously with space, that's ever more present. So, it's amazing to see even in the space community today that even, no matter what's happening on Earth, countries are always looking to work together, in terms of going to space. You look at sort of the political ways of Russia and the US, but in space, they still work together. They still, work tirelessly to improve things, efforts to go to space and help each other with capabilities, and you're seeing that ever so more now with some of the other countries like India and Japan that are now starting to get their own capabilities, and I think we'll see that more, especially here in Australia as well, and other continents. So yeah, I think that's it's ever going to be more an issue, and a good issue to have is that we're going to have loads of people that want to get into space.
I want to ask Abigail about it because I know you worked on a really cool project very specifically about human-centered design in space. So what was that like? What did you do?
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it was an interesting project. It was in collaboration with Imperial College London and Keio University in Japan. But the research and bringing in, or actually taking that research and bringing it and working collaboratively with the designers in space community was evaluating how different human-centered design disciplines are perceived in aerospace. So that was looking at industrial design, UI, UX, communications, interior design, design engineering, all of them that we would, as traditional designers, understand and maybe recognize what elements and benefits they bring, but how in space, when design has typically been associated to more engineering, like you said, practices, what does that actually mean when you say I'm an industrial designer in a space project, or I'm working on user interfaces or systems design? And so that was really great. We did a huge literature scan of as many design papers that we could get our hands on, and kind of track the progression of not only the growth of the design disciplines, but also how they were utilized within different space missions and products. And so we are seeing a growth, but we are seeing a perception that wavers. And so I think only time will tell on how we get adopted into the industry and how we actually also are able to enhance it. And you both brought up this theme, and I want to speak about it a little bit more, about how human-centered design and philosophies of that can really help innovate space tech, bringing it back down to civilians for Earth. So whether that's in a tangible sense or in a cultural sense or in a behavioral sense, I would love to hear maybe some examples that you've seen in the past or anything that you're currently working on. And yeah, let's just have a conversation about that for a bit. Khushi, how about you start us off? Yeah.
Yep. So I think one of the best examples I can think of is how research on like life support systems in space, like water purification or air filtration, for example, how they've directly influenced sustainability solutions here on Earth. And I see like designing in space as this kind of like we're designing for like a cold, isolated, constrained environment. So a lot of what we are able to do there, we can bring it back down on Earth in disaster regions, in regions affected by like water scarcity, for example. That is one example I can think of. I know there's a lot more examples about like biofabrication and regenerative medicine and like bioprinting. So those are really cool too.
Yeah. I think also where my mind goes to is this concept of tech transfer as well. And Adam, you mentioned it with the smartphone cameras, but we see so much R&D come out of space programs that don't necessarily enter either public fields or commercial industries, and a lot of them kind of get locked under key and not really able to be shared and grown and innovated on by other communities. And I think we're starting to see that change more and more. We're seeing companies want to generate that secure revenue through engaging with terrestrial markets, but we're also seeing huge programs come into fruition for tech transfer globally. They want to see the grants and the success of these missions go just beyond the end of their like decommissioning, if that makes sense. So I think that's also really interesting that we're starting to see these patents become available for other people to start really bringing them back down and sharing them amongst communities. Adam, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's a really poignant point, because I think in the space industry that we're in today, the private company is seeing the power of that today. You know, a private company can't rely on government grants for the company to survive, so they have to find a way of having large sums of revenue to keep the company going, and to be able to spend that on R&D. A good obviously example is SpaceX, with their Starlink. That is for them a massive revenue pusher that allows them to push the money back into the company and to develop the technologies that ultimately is going to make human spaceflight more possible. So I think we'll continue to see companies looking at these technologies that are developing and seeing ways in which they can ultimately, firstly, benefit people back on Earth. You look at Starlink, it's now making some of the most remote areas in the world accessible, and especially here in Australia, being able to help people in need, but also obviously for a company perspective, being able to generate a revenue and push that back into R&D, is something that space of the 1960s and 70s was never even an option. These were government organizations. And I think also with space, it's important to mention that it is sort of seen as a security. So, the defense part of space is still quite prominent, which can sometimes really sort of stunt the growth in space. Because of that, you have to be a little bit more careful. But I think that those are starting to be slightly relaxed because of this collaboration we're seeing with loads of new countries. You look at AUKUS, with Australia, UK, and the USA. They're starting to have these collaborations now, which are making things a little bit more relaxed, making things easier to move around the world. And I think ultimately that's only going to benefit the people back here on Earth.
I agree. I think that's also where designers really shine, and I think bring a unique edge to aerospace. Is we have been trained to now balance this kind of transdisciplinary communication of recognizing what a company has in terms of value proposition and potential, and then being able to look at different terrestrial markets, to engage with end clients, to understand that system and product roadmap for them, so that when you do have something that's incredibly technical, very niche, probably could be expensive to produce, limited in quantity, well, we can find paths to kind of change that for them, or create an environment where they do have potential to secure that revenue source. And I think that's what designers bring alongside a lot of other disciplines, but coming from that business strategy side. There's another thing that, when we were talking as a group on the key points that we would want to talk about in this podcast, this one came up quite a bit, and I think designers also have potential to shine some light on it. And it's the element of inclusion, diversity, and how do we see design expanding these topics in space? And what does that actually mean to say inclusion and diversity in space?
I can take that first. So my work so far has kind of been centered around innovation and a commitment to like social impact. So I'm the vice president of Space Pride, which is an international nonprofit for LGBTQ plus individuals in the aerospace industry. And through Space Pride, I have had the chance to create platforms that challenge these exclusionary narratives in space exploration. So really advocating for a more inclusive and equitable future. So far I've done this in two ways in terms of creative projects, minus keeping aside all the systems and policies work. The first one was we actually created a fashion tech piece that was displayed at the largest aerospace conference, IAC, last year in Milan. And this fashion tech piece was also had a photo shoot at London Science Museum, which I was the artistic director for. So that was a really cool opportunity because we try to use uh, cosmic data to really like show different LED lightings on the fashion tech piece. So that was a fun experience because we try to use that as a way to fundraise for all the work we do as a nonprofit. And the second one is the humanity's journey into the galaxy, which is an artwork I created with Rania Jojo Sugito and in collaboration with the Space Pride team. And it recently launched to space earlier at the beginning of this year. And very recently, we also got news that it has now landed on the moon. So that makes me and Rania space artists now. And the piece itself actually is like a black hole illustration. And the message is to kind of really celebrate our like always kind of like think about representation and inclusivity and how they've been embedded in humanity's history. So this historic landing, it kind of marks the beginning of reflections and honoring of the countless individuals that have come before us, that have advocated for equal rights, treatments, and recognition all around the world for LGBTQ plus people. And it's such an honor to be able to work with Interstellar Foundation to make this thing happen because it's a lifelong dream come true. And the piece itself now exists both in an engraved form on a chip plus in a digital microchip. So if they lose the microchip, we still have the engraved form. So two into Moon Artist.
Yes, that's wildly successful, I think. And I think it just speaks to the amazing opportunities that we are seeing come out of different space missions to be able to give individuals who haven't had a voice in space in the past, be able to say, listen, here we are, we're intelligent, we're eager, we're ready to collaborate, and let's push this. Let's push what we can do in terms of inspiring people, in terms of sharing unique messages on an international landscape, if you can call it that. Adam, you mentioned, we do have that international collaboration that goes on all the time. And we are starting to see that really transform. Adam, what are your thoughts on that? What would you define as inclusion and diversity in space? And how do you think design can help enhance that?
Yeah, it's an important topic, and I actually think probably the space industry, has got the most potential to be able to do it correctly. I think what the space does really well is it stills us down to humanity. We are one. We're not one of many. We're just one. We are humanity, and I think that's what space really makes you realize. You hear a lot of astronauts that go up to the ISS, and they have there's a word for it now which I can't quite remember, but they have this point where they look back at Earth and they have this feeling where they really realize, okay, wow,
effect.
Yeah,
that's it, the overview effect. Yeah, and it's like, wow, okay, we are just we are just the same, on the same planet. Although we come from different backgrounds and we have different cultures and stuff as well, but we are altogether, we're humanity, and that's what space is, which should be for. So I think that's what's needed in space is that inclusion, to have those different experiences, to have those different cultures, ultimately help it help design a better world, or design, have influences on what is going to happen in space. We have this opportunity where we can learn from what's happened here on Earth, and ultimately have that not happen again. The best thing designers do is learn from mistakes, and ultimately, we've had obviously plenty of them here on Earth, and I think moving forward, we can move forward together as one. And in humanity, all that space is there to do is really excel humanity forward, and I truly believe that it will continue to do that. So I think, back here on Earth, it's important to get as many people as possible into the space industry, to give their perspective, to give their experiences, and ultimately these products or the habitats and the services that will exist in space will be inclusive for everyone.
Mm-hmm. I couldn't say it better myself, Adam. I think there was something there that you said which was kind of critical, in that getting people to share their experiences and bringing them into space. And that's something that we see very being quite unique with designers, is especially right now, because design is not really a developed thing within space. There are a few programs coming up to be, space designers, things like that. But for the most part, these individuals have trained in terrestrial markets. They've worked in terrestrial industries with terrestrial users, gaining that experience, and then getting presented opportunities to go and bring these experiences into space, and kind of challenging the norm of, wait, well, I know we've been doing it like this for the past 10 years, but this automotive company has been excelling at it for the past 50 years. So let's go jump over there and bring this philosophies in. And I think that's something that is always kind of intrigued me about design, because there was a saying that where did I hear it from? A film where it said designers have the right to be weird. And we get this, we're not tied down, we're the ones that get to be kind of the silly people in the room. And it reminds me of a project that I worked on in 2023. And it was actually beginning with humpback whale citizen scientists, and they wanted to engage people more within the New York coast of the humpback whales returning. And because of this background in space and design, we ended up coming up with this amazing augmented reality experience for New York subway commuters that gave real live data of where that humpback pod was because of Earth observation data. And it was this really cool project to see how a terrestrial consumer or group wanted to engage in something that's really conservation focused, and yet space as this pillar enabled it to really come to fruition, which I thought was kind of cool. Really interesting, because we're talking about all this positive development in space and the progression that we're seeing more people be involved and more opportunities be presented. But I guess also, to be fair, maybe we should also talk about any of the barriers to this acceptance that we see, and how could we work to overcome those or prevent them from becoming larger roadblocks than maybe they all are already. Khushi, do you want to speak to that first?
Yeah, I think the space industry has kind of been long dominated by very Western, male and able-bodied perspectives. So that has kind of influenced how our design priorities have been set throughout history. So historically, marginalized communities have had really limited access to space careers. So, meaning fewer diverse voices have been able to shape space technology and policy. Now, design can come in by really doing co-design workshops or doing participatory design, making sure that we are putting inclusivity as forefront of our process. So kind of making it really part of the entire process instead of just using that as an output or an outcome.
Yeah, co-design, I think that's well said. A really strong skill that could be included in space missions. at the earlier stages as well, rather than it just being an output. Adam, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think I try and relate it back to what we're trying to do here at Metacosmos in terms of making human spaceflight accessible to all, is that currently in the world there's probably only, maybe you could argue, maybe even two or three countries that have got the ability to train people to go to space, and the access to that is so difficult. I think NASA, currently they get about 20 to 40,000 applicants to be an astronaut, and 12 people get picked. And I think yes, obviously part of that is due to the opportunities currently available, but I think if we when we're looking ahead at the world and where it's hopefully going, and with the technology advances, there's going to be a lot more opportunities to go to space in general, but even also then work in space. I previously mentioned about, obviously, in countries like India and Japan developing capabilities themselves now to do space projects within, completely internally in their own country, which, is something you couldn't have even imagined, 20 years ago. So I think that there's big strides being made there, but I think there needs to be more of an emphasis on providing more of these capabilities to other countries. Look, here in Australia, we had the first woman astronaut, Catherine Bennell-Pegg, and she had to go and do her training in Europe because the facilities and expertise just don't exist here in Australia. And she's now come back and talked a lot about her experiences and to younger kids, and to ultimately the people that are going to have these opportunities, the younger generations. And I think we're trying to find ways of making these opportunities more accessible by giving the capabilities to many of the countries around the world. And I think hopefully, there's a lot of other companies are working on doing that as well. But more importantly, it's about sharing the knowledge, and sharing the expertise. And I think that the way that the space, the world is going, hopefully, I would hope that that's going to be more of an emphasis moving forward.
Well, hopefully, maybe even through co-design, but also, I'd just love to take the opportunity to point out that you two are doing exactly that in my mind, of making space more inclusive in different ways as well. I love that you guys have taken different paths, but also from your design specialties as well, coming from strategy to industrial design, and the whole range that design disciplines can bring to really include all different kinds of users into aerospace, whether that's from a profit sense or an inclusion sense or a collaboration sense. I'm loving it. So before wrapping up, because I know we're probably running a bit short on time, I want to take the opportunity to ask you both one final question. And I can personally speak to what I've seen, in that we are seeing more and more accomplished, eager designers want to enter the industry. Do you have any advice for individuals coming from design backgrounds to get into space? And alternatively, do you have any advice for individuals already in space, maybe interested in engaging with designers more, how they can help create maybe more of an accessible entry? Adam, maybe you start us off this time.
Yeah, definitely. Being one of those people, I suppose, like I said, I consider myself a newbie to space. So I think I've recently gone through that transition, into the space industry. And I think something that helped me was really just focusing on my curiosity. Obviously, I think the best designers in the world have abundance of curiosity, and have just want to learn more. And I think focusing on that when coming into the space industry is key. It can feel a little bit intimidating because of the stature of the industry and sort of the regulations and standards. But I think as designers, it's important to to really feed off your own curiosity and just know that, you're going to learn those things in time. I think if you were to ask me today, I could probably, do another whole hour podcast talking just about the standards and regulations. You would have asked me 2 years ago, I wouldn't have even knew where to start. So I think, it's just to have that ability to keep learning, which I think hopefully as designers you should be able to have. So my advice would just be to really don't be afraid, jump in the deep end, and I think you'd be surprised. It's an amazing industry to work within. I think, when you look at what good design should be and really designing for the future, space is so exciting, developing new technologies, really having a say in some of these amazing activities that are going on in the world. We are hopefully going to be back on the moon in the next few years. And I think then, building habitats and stuff, designers are really going to be needed. So there is a need for more designers in the space industry. So if anyone's listened to this podcast and really wants to get involved, I would really encourage you to, because it's an exciting future ahead, and hopefully we can all have a say in what it looks like.
Mm-hmm. Well, Khushi, you've already put artwork on the moon, so there you are. But yes, any final comments, Khushi, about that? How to engage designers in space more?
I think I come from a different perspective because I worked in space, and after working in space, I realized, space needs design. Then I pivoted and I was like, I want to meet more designers, and that's how I met both of you. So something that has been really helpful for me is because I have this so much knowledge about space in general as a sector. I try to see how, as a designer, I can relate it back to examples here on Earth, and how I can use what I've learned from designing for and in space to how designing for Earth would work. Um, and I do try to go into more projects here which are not necessarily space related, but sometimes the learning from those projects also tie back to space. And one other thing that I've been working on is co-founding Beyond Earthbound, which is a community for arts and humanities in the space sector. So we are really trying to form a community for anybody who is interested in arts and humanities and design in the space sector can just come together, chat, introduce each other to opportunities, and we will try to help you to get funding for your ideas and help you get the right people to pursue them. So this is what I love about being in the space sector and also doing design. I get to experience both these perspectives and connect all of these really cool people I know from both the sectors together to enable more opportunities.
Yeah, that's brilliantly said. And I think maybe I'll just add one final thing building off of both of your comments, because I agree. If you're interested in space, now is the time to definitely throw yourself into the deep end. And there are opportunities that exist out there. I think, to be completely honest, sometimes I think being a pure designer might be a little bit hard to get your foot in the door, because people are looking for sometimes that, space experience. But you know what? I think what we need to remember as designers is that's our unique reason and why we will benefit your project, and staying true to that and true to the practice. And that's why they want you, right? Remember to express and showcase your skills as a designer, where, space, automotive, medical, we're used to working in it all. Like, we as a trade are transdisciplinary. So space is no different. And also, if you're not finding opportunity, you can make it yourself. Khushi, you co-founded Beyond Earth. I myself have co-founded a design consultancy, and we have a few aerospace partners now. And that creates opportunity to, you can also go work other gigs as well. It's a fantastic time to be in space. And it was an absolute pleasure to have you guys on. The discussion was great. I think we're all in agreement that design will be playing a role in the next space age. And I can say without a doubt, it's designers like yourselves that will be pushing it to the next level. Thank you for speaking with us, and we look forward to seeing what comes your way next.
Yeah, thank you. Really enjoyed the conversation, and look forward to speaking to you both again.
Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. Really enjoyed it and look forward to working with you both sometime.
Next in Line Design is the podcast for designers by young designers. We hope that you really enjoyed today's episode. We've got some really exciting conversations coming up that we can't wait to share with you. Every episode, you're going to have the chance to meet a new member of the YDC. So enjoy our rotating cast of designers and feel free to reach out in the comments just to say hey, maybe to share some feedback, your story, or tell us more about the kind of conversations that you'd like to be hearing. In the meantime, make sure to subscribe to the WDO's channels and hit that notification bell so that you never miss an episode. Thanks again for tuning in. We'll see you back here soon with more of Next in Line Design.